Melbourne 1942, and a woman applies the finishing touches to her look. She's heading out on the town. Amongst the men she might encounter, GIs arriving daily from America. And one of them is a serial killer with a bizarre fetish. He wants to steal the voices of women he meets.
Suddenly, reading the paper in the morning, there would be, alongside news of the latest developments in the war, news of the latest attack upon a woman.
Is it a New Jersey man who's been seen lurking in the shadows near tram and train terminals? Private Eddie Leonsky cuts a perplexing figure, often drunk and bizarrely talking in a high-pitched tone.
It was this voice, this softness that he wanted somehow to have, this thing that he kept emulating himself, soothing himself with these voices.
3 women are dead, and detectives are sure there will be more victims, unless they can get inside the mind of a serial killer. In 3 May weeks, no woman was safe during the so-called Melbourne Brownouts of 1942.
It created a city of shadows, of frightening corners.
With the lights doused or dimmed to make life hard for Japanese bombers, 3 women had been snatched, stripped, strangled, left for dead. Melbourne was a city at war, but the danger was from a friend at home, not the enemy abroad. Already known for his heavy drinking and sexual abuse of a woman at home in New Jersey, Private Ed Leonsky arrived in Australia at a time when relations between the Allies were not always what the authorities wanted.
More troops for the American Expeditionary Force in Australia. Armed convoys winning the game of hide-and-seek with enemy fleets.
Rumours abounded about GIs running off with the wives of Australian diggers or soldiers. Complaints were common of the Yanks being overpaid, oversexed, and overhear.
To some, the American troops seemed exotic creatures. Hollywood looks and accent, better fed, and certainly better paid. And where were the Aussie boys? Spilling blood on foreign soil, while these Americans were on a cushy posting and not even seeing action.
Certainly, when a Melbourne girl went out on the town, it was likely she'd meet a GI. Mrs. Ivy Violet Mloud went out on Saturday, May 2nd. Around 5 o'clock, she went to see a friend with whom she stayed until 8. After that, she headed into the city, where she was seen by witnesses wearing a black dress with a lacy neckline. Ivy knew the area well. She'd worked there as a waitress in a cafe. Court transcripts from the day reveal that by 11 o'clock, Ivy was in the home of an aircraft mechanic that she had known for 7 months called John Patrick Thompson. He knew her as Ivy Diabolical, the maiden name that she'd used when out with him. He didn't know she was married. The couple intended to start a new life in New South Wales. As they made plans, dreamed of a new life, Eddie Leonsky tried to forget his.
The appalling things that Leonsky had suffered as a child were all locked up in his psyche, and he was a very troubled man. Not even drink would help him. The one source of comfort to him was his mother, and he was missing her rather badly.
Meanwhile, Leonsky trawled some exotic places, as well as some classic wartime bars where he liked to listen to women singing, and stayed late to do just that.
One of the most interesting features of Eddie Leonsky's story is his relationship with the female voice. He himself would sing with a very high-pitched female voice. You gotta imagine this is like a burly American soldier that would emit very, very high-pitched feminine tones. It sounds almost eerie, the idea of him almost trying to self-soothe in that way.
Across the street from where Eddie Leonsky was leaving a bar, Ivy was saying goodnight to John Thompson. He offered to walk her to the tram terminus, but she insisted she should go alone. She set off to catch the night tram and reassured John that she'd be fine. There were enough people about for her to cry for help if it was needed.
It looks like from the evidence that Ivy really wasn't worried about walking home on her own. She went off into the wee small hours toward the tram and didn't really want somebody to accompany her. Perhaps it was because she was a married woman and didn't really want to be seen with a man.
As she left the house in the Albert Park area of Melbourne, she may have caught a glimpse of an American GI, obviously drunk, walking away from the Bleak House Hotel. Or perhaps she didn't see him. It was 2:30 a.m. in the Brownout. It wasn't easy to see friend or foe, Australian or American. Her tram was due at 2:45, just 15 minutes to wait for her ride back to East Melbourne. Eddie Leonsky approaches her, asks if they can talk. He likes the sound of the voice of a woman.
At some point, she must have become frightened.
She has every reason to be. The mind of the man she's about to encounter is deeply troubled. Private Eddie Leonsky was a larger-than-life figure both at Camp Pell in Melbourne's Royal Park and in the town. He was physically well-built, working out every day. A striking character in the bars too, who enjoyed trying to outdrink those he met. He would get outrageously drunk. The next day he would remember little of what he'd done. One of his notable traits was to sing at an incredibly high pitch. Like his mother, he would say. Alcohol and the Leonsky family did not mix well. Indeed, there was much about the Leonskys that few knew about. Eddie was one of 4, 2 brothers and a sister, born to immigrant parents in New Jersey. He was considered the good one.
Eddie Leonsky's dad was an alcoholic who regularly beat up not only Eddie, but his other 2 brothers as well. So he would have grown up in that very violent environment. In fact, his mom tried to save herself and her kids from it by getting a divorce. But then what happens? She marries another guy who's just as violent, who beats up Eddie again. So those initial formative years around what his expectations were from parental love and from father figures would have began with that very violent overtone.
Perhaps not surprisingly, given such a tortured family background, Eddie Leonsky himself showed 2 distinct personalities.
Interestingly, when Eddie was sober, he was described as a really good soldier and a good guy, very affable and kind. But when he drank, things changed. And when he drank to excess.
He was an obsessive when it came to drinking. He drank just to get drunk.
We're not talking about 5 or 6 beers. We'd say that at any given time he could sit down with 36 beers interspersed with other concoctions with various different other spirits. So he was unable to stop once he started.
And he would make an exhibition of himself. He would do handstands on the bar, I believe, get into fights with people. The next day he would remember nothing.
Leonsky's obsessional drinking reveals much about the state of his mind and about what he had inherited and learned from his father.
If what you see around you is an appropriate way of coping with stress or tiredness or problems is through the use of alcohol. An appropriate way of being able to have fun is only when I'm drunk. An appropriate way of being able to have the confidence to approach a woman is only when I'm intoxicated. Then you learn that. And if you combine that with a predisposition to addiction and alcoholism, then you have a recipe for disaster.
Eddie had been bullied in his native New Jersey when a child and taunted for being a mother's boy. Leonsky's mother was heard by neighbours singing the teenage Leonsky to sleep, perhaps explaining his other obsession, the sound of a woman's voice.
Eddie would have seen this almost continuum from an idealized mother with a soft, sweet voice that would be there to save him, and then a very, very aggressive father that he had to hide from.
Alongside the violence ingrained in his home life, another ingredient was added to the cocktail that made up the mind of the heavy-drinking Eddie Leonsky.
All soldiers in wartime are trained to kill. The American GIs with Eddie Leonsky were in Australia. They hadn't seen action yet, but they're en route to the South Pacific. Eddie Leonsky knew how to kill.
Nobody in Australia or America truly has the full picture of Eddie Leonsky as he steps out eventually to meet Ivy Mcleod. That he could kill is clear. That he loses control when drunk is obvious to all. That he has a bizarre fetish about women, nobody knows. What will happen when all three factors come together?
May 2 was a Saturday, and it was the night off for the men. Leonsky and his other 15,000 GIs in Camp Pell were sleeping two to a tent. They had to get out, so they went off into the bars and the pubs of the city to go drinking.
They headed for a bar in Beaconsfield Parade near the Melbourne waterfront.
They were drinking whiskey, and it's very likely that Leonsky was drinking for each whiskey a beer chaser.
So, in murky wartime Melbourne, a trained killer who lost control of his actions when drunk, which he was every night, and with a deeply unsettling range of psychiatric issues, was walking the streets. Late autumn was not a good time to be a woman out alone, which Ivy Mcleod was, in the Brownout too. As his day had passed, Leonsky, true to form, had become more and more drunk. Witnesses saw him run out of money, borrow some from fellow soldiers, spend it on drink and then go find another bar. He had spotted Ivy as he walked from one of his many bars. As she considered heading home to East Melbourne, she was oblivious to the danger presented by the tortured mind of Private Eddie Leonsky. Eddie Leonsky spoke to Ivy Mcleod sometime between 2:30 and 2:50 a.m. of May 3rd. Hours later, a grim discovery.
Just before light on May the 3rd, a barman at the Bleak House Hotel, where Leonsky had almost certainly been drinking, bent down to pick up something from the floor.
Opposite the hotel, he looked across and thought what he saw was a shop mannequin. Then he saw an American GI walking away, so he went over to the doorway to take a closer look.
It was a dead body, and I think that's where the nightmare that Australians are waking up to really begins. Ivy was found naked, her clothes strewn around everywhere, and was only wearing her belt, presumably because they couldn't get it off or didn't want to.
A barman, Harold Gibson, rang the police from inside the hotel. He picked up 2 bags and covered Ivy's body to protect her modesty. People were beginning to set off for work. He didn't want them to see the body.
So was it Leonsky? He'd been drinking that day and that night, but there was no record at that point of him ever attacking anybody, and it wasn't even really clear that there'd been a murder.
No records of attacks on women in Australia may be, but American GIs had all sorts of backgrounds that the Australian authorities knew nothing about. Leonsky had in fact almost been thrown out of the US Army for assaulting a woman in America. Though naked, an autopsy revealed that Ivy had not been sexually assaulted. Detectives assumed murder, but at first couldn't be certain. As for the American military authorities, on hearing the report of the witness, they simply refused to cooperate. How, in the Brownout, could anybody see what nation's uniform the soldier seen running from the scene was wearing?
It was an absolute mystery. At that point, nobody suspected or even thought of suspecting Eddie Leonsky. The first person who went to talk to the police was John Thompson. But in actual fact, the way they made it sound was as if he was a suspect, but he'd been asleep all night and he didn't even know about the murder until his landlady told him the next morning.
The police had found evidence in Ivy's purse to lead them to discover her identity. They released the information, and the man she had spent that Saturday evening with contacted the police to tell them everything he knew. Another witness came forward saying that she had been approached by an American soldier that same evening. He'd asked her to go skating. She had refused, upon which, amazingly, the soldier simply said she was lucky. he'd planned on killing somebody that night. Australian detectives had heard enough to suspect an American soldier was involved in the death of Ivy Mloud. A few days later, medical investigators confirmed that Ivy had indeed been murdered. Her skull had been fractured, probably whilst she was being strangled.
Melbourne had a murder on the loose, and the evidence suggested that it was an American soldier. Now remember, in those days there was no DNA evidence, there were no CCTV cameras, they certainly didn't collect evidence in the forensic way that we did today. And add that to the fact that there were 15,000 American soldiers in the city.
And the American officers in charge were not in a hurry to help the Victoria authorities, which meant that the full story of the murders of the 3 Australians in 1942 has only recently come to light. Court documents, now digitised, tell how Leonsky was allowed to walk freely around Melbourne, even though he had actually confessed to strangling a woman when talking to a fellow GI. Later, some Australians would point to that incident as evidence that some American soldiers simply thought they could get away with murder. Private Anthony Gallo of the 52nd Battalion saw Leonsky drunk outside the tent that they both shared on May 9th. Leonsky said to him, "I killed Gallo, I killed." Gallo already knew Leonsky was capable of violence when drunk.
So Eddie kills, and he's actually very shaken about this because he goes back to his barracks, wakes up a fellow soldier, and confesses and says, "This is what I've done." Gallon doesn't believe him, thinks, okay, go back to sleep. This is ridiculous. But actually, this really had happened, and I think he, to some extent, may have been as surprised about what happened. He must have been coming down from what happened and needed to speak.
Amazingly, he confessed. But if he was the killer, he didn't convince his fellow American GI. Private Gallo heard his confession, but he told nobody.
Meanwhile, in bars and cafes across town, there were murmurings aplenty of where Ivy Mloud's killer had come from. America. And everybody knew what would be happening on a Saturday night in Melbourne. Lots of Americans would be out getting drunk, and lots of Australian girls would be on the town with them, including Pauline Thompson, who told her policeman husband that she was going to a dance at the Music Lovers Club in Melbourne. Pauline, who had 3 children, worked part-time as a receptionist at the Melbourne radio station 3AW and was planning a night out with the girls that she worked alongside. If asked, she would be giving her maiden name, O'Brien.
During times of war, we know that perhaps because death is so close in everyone's mind, that people are much more open to intimacy and human connection. So we know that extramarital affairs soar. And this night, Pauline was looking for that human connection. Her husband was away, and she had arranged to meet up with a GI and just basically just have a good time.
Eddie Leonsky was about to confront another woman, alone in Brownout, Melbourne, and he would again be drunk and in search of the sound of a woman's voice. Pauline Thompson was planning on meeting an American GI before going on to a dance club in Melbourne, but he was so late she went on to the Astoria Hotel bar. There, she was seen with an American soldier described as well-built.
Oh, this was classic young woman out on the town stuff. There was singing, there was dancing, there was partying. She loved gin and orange, loved gin and orange. It was wartime. Tensions were high and inhibitions were low.
Pauline and her American GI made an impressive couple as they sampled Melbourne's nightlife. Though she was from Bendigo, a 3-hour train journey north, Pauline lived in a Melbourne apartment house. Pauline Thompson was to die that night, May 9th. Her body was discovered on the steep steps outside of her home the following morning. It was precisely a week since the discovery of the body of Ivy Mloud. She, like Pauline, had been strangled.
The second murder really struck terror into the community. It was revealed that the victim had been seen in the company of an American soldier, and she'd been stripped of her clothes and she'd been strangled.
Did Melbourne have a serial killer on its hands? It appeared that this killer might well be an American.
This really wasn't good for relations between the Americans and the Australians. They'd been trying to build bridges between them. For a little while, the Anzacs were known as the Yanksacks. And then the story breaks.
Police quickly announced that they were keeping an open mind about who the killer might be. They went on record to say that they believed either Mrs. Thompson was throttled by a stranger after she left the soldier to go to her apartment, or by a man whom she may have known, or simply someone waiting in the darkness near to her home. They were sure that she was murdered on the steps outside her front door, but they were sure of little else.
The Americans themselves were not about to go hunting through a camp of 15,000 soldiers with limited evidence, and so were rather reluctant to help the local police.
2 women were dead, but there were no suspects. How would Leonsky have been feeling? What was going on inside the mind of Eddie Leonsky? Again, he told his cellmate he had killed. Another confession. But why?
Whether a killer wants to confess or not varies. For some, they confess for narcissistic reasons. For others, they want to confess because it's too big. It's something that they can't control. Yet for others, keeping it secret is a means of control. Not just safety, but control, or even reliving it. I think in this case with Eddie, the confession was probably because he was literally sobering up to what he had done. Literally and metaphorically, he saw in the light of day that he'd taken this young woman's life.
The confession reveals a man at war with himself.
One of the things that he often described was this Jekyll and Hyde character. He saw this in himself. He saw the light and the dark. He saw himself when he was drinking, when he wasn't drinking, when he was violently aroused, when he wasn't.
Leonsky's confession fell on deaf ears. Is there a suspicion of a cover-up?
I don't think it was a cover-up, but I do believe, in retrospect, that if it had been 2 American women who'd been killed, Private Gallo's evidence, Private Gallo's story of the confession would have been passed on and more would have been made of it.
Instead, nothing was done or said, and Leonsky went about his business as usual. The investigating detectives asked for cooperation from their American colleagues in the military police and were allowed to take witnesses to Camp Pell, who watched soldiers march past. They were hoping to see if anybody could be picked out, but nobody recognized anybody who'd been with either woman on the night they were killed.
So Eddie Leonsky was basically allowed to go about his business, and for him that just meant getting more and more drunk, day after day, night after night.
Which put Gladys Hosking, a 40-year-old from Perth now living in Melbourne and working at the university's chemistry department, in grave danger one evening in May. Her father had received a letter from her saying she was nervous about walking alone at night in the city and always tried to travel with a companion.
By the 3rd week in May, women were really frightened of going out at night. The local paper, the Melbourne Argus, described it as a panic.
But Gladys, nervous or not, often found herself out at night. Keen on amateur dramatics and ballet dancing, she would regularly scamper across the city to meet up with people. On the 17th of May, a rainy evening, she left work walking with a friend under an umbrella. A short time later, she had dinner somewhere in the area of the Royal Park where Camp Pell was based, and not far from where she lived.
Gladys was seen later still walking under an umbrella. The person holding it was an American GI, and the witness said there was something protective about the way the umbrella was being held.
The witness was Private Malcolm K. Walsh, a military policeman.
It appeared that Gladys was not especially in danger. There had been a couple of murders, but there had been a couple of thousand dates between American soldiers and local women on the same night, and so the MP saw nothing especially to worry about.
Gladys walked away from Private Walsh and into the darkness of the Brownout. It was May 17th, 14 days since the murder of Ivy Mcleod and 9 days since the discovery of Pauline Thompson's body. Both women had been walking alone in the darkness late at night. Both had been seen in the company of a handsome American soldier. Both were dead. What fate awaited Gladys? Melbourne was experiencing a wet and windy May in 1942, and the arrival of thousands of soldiers to the Royal Park had left the area very muddy. In the early hours of the 18th, Eddie Leonsky was stopped by an Australian soldier who was guarding military equipment.
The guard couldn't help but notice that he was covered in mud, head to toe. Then Leonsky asked him for directions back to Camp Pell, Area 1.
He seemed drunk, agitated, almost frantic. He was crying and speaking in an unworldly, high-pitched voice.
The voice he reverted to when he was drunk is telling. Leonsky was a man hugely influenced by an overprotective mother who sang him to sleep to soothe his anxiety in the face of a drunken, violent father. He was obsessed with women's voices, and on that night he was talking to people using a woman's voice.
When he eventually got back to his area, a guard told him to go and wash himself. He was so dirty. He told his tent mate that he'd fallen in mud.
Private Marcel A. Jasinski of Company B of the 52nd Signal Battalion of the US Army was stationed at Camp Pell along with Leonsky. He remembered seeing Leonsky entering the latrine and asking, "Where the hell have you been?" He just looked as if he was in a daze, he told friends. On the other side of the park, a gruesome discovery was about to be made. Gladys Hosking was found dead, strangled with her clothes torn about her in a muddy trench just 350 yards from her home and adjacent to the park. By her body, an umbrella inside of which was the local Melbourne Herald and a copy of that month's Women's Weekly. Her features were almost unrecognisable because of the mud which covered her face. Whoever had killed her also had to be covered in mud.
There was no way that Leonsky could not be connected with Gladys Hosking's murder. He was seen covered in mud, she was found covered in mud. He'd been seen walking the park, her body was found in the park. He was an American soldier, and she'd been seen walking with an American soldier.
And when Private Gallo heard the news about the latest murder, there was immediate realization that his tent mate perhaps had not been fooling around when he had said he'd killed women. He reported what he knew to his superiors. They, along with Melbourne detectives, turned all of their resources to Private Eddie Leonsky. They searched his tent. Inside, they found a Melbourne newspaper from May 5th, 2 days after Ivy Mcleod had been killed. The paper was open on the page that the article about her death was featured. Another newspaper was found, open again, at a story about the death of Pauline Thompson.
Once Leonsky had killed the third time, the case firmed up very, very quickly against him.
As soon as it was put to him that he was a killer, Leonsky put his hands up and said yes. He confessed immediately. It was almost as if it was a relief. And this isn't necessarily the case for many people in this situation. For a lot of people, there's a sense of, I need to hide it, I'm embarrassed, I'm ashamed, it wasn't me. Nothing like this. Eddie wanted to say what had happened. In fact, he wanted to explain.
Ivy Mcleod, Pauline Thompson and Gladys Hosking had indeed been strangled by Leonsky, who had appeared to all of the women as an amiable American before becoming an assassin. The confession and a huge amount of evidence quickly unearthed meant that a conviction was inevitable, but there were still many questions.
Firstly, there was a very important point. Should he be tried in an Australian civil court, or should he be tried in an American military court?
And of course, there was this very pressing question about whether or not Leonsky was sane and he could be tried as a sane person.
The system was in uncharted territory. The politicians wanted the case tried in local civil courts, but this was a soldier under the jurisdiction of a foreign power, albeit an ally.
General MacArthur himself, leader of the Joint Services Command in the South Pacific, became involved. There was a real threat that anti-American feelings could get out of hand. He wanted Leonsky tried by Americans, convicted by Americans, and almost certainly executed by Americans. The Australian authorities gave way, still the only time a killer on Australian soil has not been tried by an Australian court. It's not possible to consider this case without also considering world events. At this point, Ivy, Pauline and Gladys are part of a bigger story. Melbourne, part of a theatre of war. Leonsky is a man few want to hang around. Is the Brownout killer expendable?
This was a problem that MacArthur just didn't need. The push against the Japanese had begun. Air raids were planned against Timor, about 600 miles north of Darwin. Anzacs and Americans were fighting side by side as the push against Burma was being planned. It was clear that this is something MacArthur just did not need.
Leonsky had one chance. A young counsel who would go on to be a major figure in United States legal and political circles was appointed to defend Leonsky. Ira C. Rothgerber would go on to distinguish himself as a tough Denver lawyer and to work for President John F. Kennedy. He was no shrinking violet.
This was this young man's first major defence case, and the person he was defending was facing the death penalty. It wasn't going to be a speedy trial. He was going to take his time, and he was going to be tenacious.
Because of this question of his sanity, Leonsky is seen by a psychiatrist in Melbourne, who actually goes on to say that he found him very friendly and actually in quite a good mood. Didn't in fact think he had any issues around sanity, that he was very sane, and in fact made the point that it was only when his mother was mentioned that he began to seem agitated, as if the biggest issue for Eddie was that his mom didn't find out he'd done something bad. That was the most important thing for him, which then begs the question, if he was being seen by a psychiatrist today, would the same questions have been asked? Psychiatry and psychology have evolved since then. We know more. And one has to wonder if there would have been more of a case made about his ability to take full responsibility over his actions.
Rothgerber probed and pushed for evidence of insanity and instability. Why would Leonsky get so drunk and lace alcoholic concoctions with such bizarre ingredients? Whiskey and beer with tomato ketchup, milk, mustard and gin. Why would he sing in a woman's voice? Why would he talk in general conversation using a woman's voice? And why would he always give the same reason for killing his victims?
So when he goes on to explain what happened, for example, with the first victim who was found with the belt, he makes a point of saying, I couldn't get the belt off. Just so you understand, it was her voice I wanted to take. And this happens with each and every victim. He goes on to explain that it was this voice, this softness that he wanted somehow to have, this thing that he kept emulating himself, soothing himself with these voices.
Would the court-martial agree that Leonsky was insane? If it did, it would mean Leonsky would not face the death penalty.
Now, Rothgerber felt very passionately that he shouldn't be held completely accountable, that his faculties were in fact compromised. And he refers to the psychiatrist's report and says, look, yes, you've said that he's a psychopath, but also you've made the point that it was because of the alcoholism, that if given the same situations, he could do this again. And if that's the case, can he in fact be held accountable? And he actually campaigns very, very strongly in the hopes that that this soldier won't meet the fate that was in front of him, which was the death penalty.
That expert conclusion was followed by two more, and all three concurred. They decided he was bad, not mad, and if allowed, he would do it again.
After the 4-day trial, the members of the court-martial required only 40 minutes to reach a verdict. Leonsky was ordered to stand before the president's table. He turned to Ira Rothgerber and asked if he could hold his hand. The pair stood, holding hands.
1 out of 4 of all of the jurors believed that he was in fact insane.
If the court were to split down the middle Leonsky might escape the death penalty.
Nobody from the families of the murdered women was present at the court-martial. Such niceties were not observed in wartime. The president told him, "Leonsky, it's my duty to inform you that this court, in closed session and upon secret ballot, with 3/4 of the members present concurring, found you guilty of all charges. I have to inform you also that this court, with all of its members concurring, sentences you to be hanged by the neck until you are dead."
Leonsky gave nothing away, emotionless.
The indefatigable Rothgerber petitioned for clemency. He called on President Roosevelt to commute the sentence to life in prison. Ivy, Pauline and Gladys had been killed, 3 innocents, but what was the point of executing a man with considerable and very damaging issues? Would his plea work?
This was a traumatic, life-changing moment for Rothgerber. He was a young, committed lawyer. It was his first defence, and the man he was defending could face hanging.
News of the verdict was greeted positively in the Australian press. The question of whether Leonsky would live or die would not be one answered by America's president.
He said this was a military matter, and it was something for General MacArthur to handle. The timing for Leonsky couldn't have been worse. A few weeks after the trial, Americans and Australian soldiers get involved in a firefight in Brisbane in a bar. Couldn't have been worse, the timing. An Australian was killed, and there we go. The relationship issue had reared its ugly head again.
General MacArthur never admitted it, but he wanted the story to end. He was determined to stamp down on anything that might drive a wedge between the Australians and the Americans.
Leonsky, the serial killer, would not have his life spared. MacArthur was in no mood to do anything other than serve military priorities.
So in the end, Eddie Leonsky, abused child, damaged man, killer, is sacrificed for American-Australian relations.
These are the men who are defending the aerial approaches to Australia. And here's real action. Jap plane spotted. In a matter of seconds, the anti-aircraft crews are letting them have it.
Leonsky was moved to Melbourne's Pentridge prison on November 9th, 1942. He said so long to his jailer, joking that he was going for a facelift and was hanged. But that was not the end of the story.
The terrible deaths of Ivy, Pauline and Gladys would end up changing American law forever. In 1951, the extraordinary work of Ira Rothgerber ended up creating the Uniform Code of Military Justice, law which is still in use today.
Eddie Leonsky was executed within 12 weeks of being sentenced and found guilty. He had carried out his series of killings in just 3 weeks. The deaths of Ivy, Pauline and Gladys at the hands of Eddie Leonsky could have been prevented if he hadn't been allowed into Australia in the first place. He had already attacked a woman in the United States. Ivy's tragedy was to be 15 minutes early for her late tram ride home. Pauline, looking forward to her new life in New South Wales, had been warned by her estranged husband not to go out with GIs. She didn't listen. And Gladys had even told her father how she was afraid of venturing out into Melbourne after dark. But she still did. She too was to become a victim of the Brownout Strangler, Eddie Leonsky. 12205 Imperial Avenue, Cleveland, Ohio, being torn down.
Amen! Hallelujah! Tear it down! Tear it down! Tear it down! Tear it down!
Officially, it's become a risk to the public health. But as it's wiped away from the world, demolition teams cannot remove the memories of what has gone on inside. Those who did manage to escape the horrors of 12205 tell of macabre discoveries.
She caught a glimpse of one of the decomposing bodies, which frightened her and just made her, realize, I have got to get out of here.
Another victim enters 12205 with a man she thinks charming.
He raped her and made her repeat after him, "Yes, sir, I like it." He was as frightening an attack as can be imagined by any woman.
Others escape by throwing themselves from the upper floor windows of a house full of pain, not knowing if they'll survive. A passerby calls police.
She fell out the window upstairs on the second floor.
Okay, are you there
And
with
she
her?
laying on the ground, butt neck.
Are you with her right now?
I'm right here right now. She laying on the ground,
Okay,
butt neck.
He rapes, he binds, he murders. He rapes, he binds, he murders.
Each time Sowell entices a woman into his home, whether they live or die, is up to him. How many times will he rape? How many times will he murder? Before anyone can get inside the mind of a serial killer. Mount Pleasant, Cleveland, Ohio. Its name belies what a dangerous neighborhood it can be. Between 2007 and 2009, it proves all too treacherous for women walking the streets alone. Anthony Sowell claims to be hearing voices telling him to kill.
I think I just choked him. Nothing like torture, beat,
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
No.
But they were like off or something maybe? Or what? What do you think would cause you to choke them? I mean, just off the top of your head. Think about it. Punishing?
My girl and them something. That's all I can say.
That was punishing them because of...
I was the punish.
Who was the punisher?
I can't explain it.
When women meet Anthony Sowell, they think he's a good guy, someone with whom to party.
Well, I think if you look at the MO that Anthony Sowell used, a lot of the women actually went willingly to his home.
And those women had gone to Anthony Sowell's house maybe to use drugs or drink or just hang out with him and had never left the home.
A very specific demographic was in danger. Using his bare hands, Sowell becomes a one-man lethal weapon.
You had a body that was right here. You had a body that was over here. You had a bag, there was a body in there.
Oh my God.
Hold on, look, I ain't finished. And you got a body behind the wall. Well, a lot of dirt back there too. A lot of dirt all over that body.
Inside his killing chambers, Anthony Sowell displays the two sides to his personality. When his life is surrounded by order, discipline, routine, he's a regular guy. When he's out of work, down on his luck, he turns to drink and drugs. And then things can get very ugly.
On October 29th, 2009, some Cleveland police officers, some detectives actually went to Anthony Sowell's home on Imperial Avenue, and they were looking to arrest him. A woman had accused him of rape. When they went to the house, he was not there.
The streets Sowell cruises, as police call it his house, are home to a lot of women whose lives have been captured by drugs. Around the time that Sowell stalks the neighborhood for women, decades of economic distress and home foreclosures placed him in a world of failure, decay, disorder, drugs too, and drink. Lots of drink.
There was a little corner store right there that was kind of the hub of activity on Imperial Avenue. They were really familiar with Anthony Sowell. He would come in and buy, tall beers, King Cobra beers, which he would drink often. People would come over to the store when they would come to his house, buy beer, party, kind of back and forth.
A cocktail of factors turns Sowell into a monster, one who escapes justice for 2 years. That late October day, the Cleveland police finally decide that events surrounding Sowell and 12205 Imperial need further investigation.
They entered the home and they found the bodies of 2 women who were basically sitting out in the open, decomposing. Once they found that, they called in a lot more police and some crime scene investigators. And over the course of maybe a week or more, they found many more bodies.
After digging in the backyard, investigators found 3 more bodies and the remains of a 4th.
There was bodies everywhere and crawl spaces on the floor. He's surrounded by his handiwork everywhere he turns.
One woman, really all they found of her was a skull that was in a bucket under some stairs in the basement. It turns out that there was 11 women total who had gone missing since about 2007.
Over 2 years, Anthony Sowell had somehow managed to lure the women into his home, rape them, torture them, kill them, leave their rotting bodies to decompose all around him, creating an unspeakable stench. And nobody knew. What, or who, made Anthony Sowell into the so-called Cleveland Strangler?
So many people could have seen this, but they didn't. The army thought he was great, prison wardens thought he was great, neighbors thought he was a lovely guy.
Sowell himself says his first taste of violence came when he was a child sharing a home in East Cleveland. He was not a happy boy.
Anthony Sowell was a timid, somewhat taunted boy.
He wasn't a person that everybody immediately had a specific memory of, but he was kind of always in the background, maybe a little bit socially awkward.
He grew up with a lack not only of a father figure, but a lot of very strong maternal figures. He had his mom, he had his grandmother, he had cousins of different ages, he had his 2 sisters.
The mother and the grandmother often would beat the children, that Sowell got beaten a lot.
She would beat them with an electrical cord to the point that they bled.
Sowell never presented recollections of his childhood to investigators. He raised them in court much later. By then, an independent source had come forward to offer an alternative memory of life in the Sowell household when he was a child. He wasn't always the victim. He was also the perpetrator.
One of his female cousins has reported that from the age of 11, she was continually raped by Anthony.
One relative testified during the trial that Sowell and other men in that house had sexually abused her from a very young age.
That may have had an influence on how he sees women and his sense of entitlement to have sex with those women, which was very clear from his interaction with some of his victims that survived.
When he leaves school, Sowell joins up. Leaving the chaos of East Cleveland and his abusive family environment behind, he settles into a routine. Military life suits him.
Maybe the stringent rules in the military were good for him for a while. I know that he was able to, cope in the military, do his job.
How long were you in the service?
7 years.
7 years?
You realistic?
You like to be in the Marine Corps?
Oh, good.
Yeah.
It's during this time as well, towards the end of his time as a Marine, that he begins to drink and drink quite extensively.
And in fact, at one point in the military, he married a woman who, she actually died, but her mother said that she had married Anthony because she kind of felt bad for him and she wanted him to be able to complete his time in the military, and she was able to help him keep on track.
But on leaving the military, it all begins to go wrong. It is 1989 when the seeds are sown for the shocking tragedy of 12205 Imperial. 2 things have changed in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood by the time Sowell returns from the Marines.
I think he came home to an East Cleveland that had actually declined even more than when he had left. The city was kind of getting poorer. There was the crack epidemic was really starting to affect the streets. There was a lot of mothers and fathers starting to use those drugs.
Meanwhile, women who'd previously led respectable lives began roaming the streets looking for ways of getting high, vulnerable to abuse. And Anthony Sowell himself was soon finding it hard to pass a liquor store.
2007, though, he fell apart. His girlfriend left him and he failed to show up for work. In the end, he was fired and he started to scavenge the streets for metal to sell as scrap. Inevitably, he returned to his crack cocaine habit.
He was really, really the kind of guy that was doing a lot of drinking. He'd go to the store in the morning and get a beer and just kind of continue that throughout the day.
A pattern is set. The drunk Sowell would home in on vulnerable women and use his charm to entice them back to his place.
It wasn't long that he was home before he was actually accused of harming several women. And actually two in kind of close proximity. There was two women, both of whom were pregnant, but also, either abusing drugs or hanging out with people who were drinking, that Anthony Sowell was accused of raping.
This lady was heavily pregnant when she turned up to Sowell's house. And after spending some time together, she told him she was leaving, but he wouldn't let her go. He grabbed her and he began to choke her.
He was never prosecuted for that case because he was actually arrested for another case, another rape, within the same year. And he was prosecuted in that case. He ended up pleading guilty to attempted rape and was given a sentence of up to 15 years in prison.
He was released in 2005 to an East Cleveland still suffering from a drugs epidemic. He moved into the family property, 12205 Imperial Avenue. Today, where 12205 stood is a vacant lot, and locals like it that way. If its walls could tell a story, it would be one of human misery, of the last moments, the dying breaths of sisters, mothers, daughters. Crystal Dozier was described by her mother as the responsible one of her children, before she became addicted to crack cocaine. She could be found wandering the streets of Mount Pleasant. On May 17, 2007, by now a mother of 7 and aged 35, she went out to score drugs. She comes across Anthony Sowell. He had his flirting patter off to a T.
He would say, hey, do you want to come in and have a drink? And his house was a place where he would let people crash if they were using drugs and didn't want to go home. The house, you could tell, it was definitely used for a place where people could just crash and could just party. There's beer bottles or beer cans all around.
Crystal is in a daze as she hears him. Dreamily, she enters 12205. It looks ordinary enough. Sowell has raped before. He has never killed. But the motive and the method of killing for the first time is always lurking deep inside the mind of a serial killer. Will Crystal Dozier realize in time that she might die at any moment? Crystal Dozier is one of many women in Mount Pleasant, Cleveland, who's been captured by drugs and spotted by Anthony Sowell, lured into 12205 Imperial.
They all had these vulnerabilities that Anthony Sowell appeared to hone in on.
As Crystal walks towards the porch of 12205, Sowell may have guessed she'd had a troubled life. Pregnant at 13, a mother of 2 by 17, of 7 by her mid-20s. Hers was now a transient world of drugs and drink. To her, Sowell means the chance of another hit, another high. She responds when he approaches her. Why wouldn't she?
So I looked at her, and she looked so sad and pitiful, like she just had a rough time or something. So I said, a beer? I said, how you gonna get a beer? I said, it's closed. Oh, they'll open up or something like that. Okay. So I said, I tell you what, come on with me, and you can get all the beers you want.
So you can imagine she meets him, he seems charming enough and persuasive enough that she decides, you know what, I'll go to this person's house. So any apprehension is clearly not big enough to stop her.
They didn't recognise him or see him as a potential risk.
And then she gets there, and that's where things begin to change. So any facade that he's been wearing of being nice or of being normal and caring, that all goes by the wayside. And that's when the terror sets in, because his tools are there. The tools to bind, the tools to hurt, and ultimately the tools to kill.
The woman had been drinking with Sowell when he actually just leapt on her. He began to strangle her. He shouted loudly what he was going to do to her, threatening the most appalling sexual attacks.
From what detectives could learn later from those who'd escaped the Sowell ordeal, it's likely he carried out his threat and raped Crystal. Sowell, in command, the master of events.
Rape is not about sex. Rape is all about control. Rape is about abuse and overpowering and hurting and controlling.
Strangulation is a very intimate kind of killing. It allows the offender to feel the person's life slip away from them. So it's a very intimate way of killing someone, but it also is the ultimate expression of power and control over someone.
He buried her body by the backyard fence of 12205. Family members searched for her throughout the time she was missing, still clinging onto the hope that she was alive. In fact, she had become victim number 1 of Anthony Sowell. Around that time, 2007, Sowell, a registered sex offender, would regularly receive visits at 12205 from the authorities, but they seldom entered. He seemed to be okay. The word was that prison had changed him. One of the bitter ironies about the Sowell story is that he responded well to discipline.
The indication is that during his prison sentence, he was a model prisoner.
He listened, he followed orders, directions, never really got in a lot of trouble.
And that's not surprising, because it gave him back that sense of structure and routine that he obviously had in the military and was missing when he came into civilian life.
He participated in Alcoholics Anonymous, so he was aware that he had an alcohol problem.
He's able to appear very lucid, very normal.
It was that ability to seem normal like a regular guy which would mean that the murder of Crystal Dozier inside his house was only the start of Sowell's killing career. Struggling women would go missing from the neighbourhood, but throughout that time, Sowell relentlessly attracted women back to 12205, whilst police did nothing.
You know, their loved ones that they did love would go missing, but they would always call after a day or two. They would always come back. They would never miss important events like birthdays or Christmas. And so when they went missing for a longer period of time and didn't show up, a lot of them contacted the police and said, you know, this is different. And we're basically told, you know, hey, they'll come back when they're done using drugs.
As is the case with many serial killers, they go for the most vulnerable in our society.
So the police were dismissive of these women for the same reason that Anthony Sowell likely targeted them.
They're an easy target. They're easy, they're not missed, and this is precisely what he does.
I think he probably knew that people weren't going to come, you know, beating down his door looking for these women.
Tishana Culver fitted that precise profile when she went missing in June 2008, drifting in and out of family life. They didn't report her disappearance. There seemed little point as the 33-year-old had gone missing so often. Leishanda Long was just 17, the youngest of Sowell's victims, but a mother of 3 when she went missing. Her life was in a mess. Deemed unfit to raise her children, she was seldom in contact with family members who loved her and who would one day receive horrific news.
One family, I think it was Leishanda Long, the only thing they really recovered of her body was her head. And it was in a bucket in the basement, which was very difficult for them. They didn't even have a body to bury.
I know one thing I think always makes me mad is they had kids in it.
And they was out in the street?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a big thing in my head.
Tonya Carmichael was another who'd been in prison for drugs offences.
Her life kind of intersected with Sowell's early on. They both grew up on Page Avenue. She knew him, probably tangentially. The families kind of knew each other.
Every female that you have brought to the house, have each and every one of them used drugs or are using drugs like crack or whatever? Okay. Is that one of the reasons why they come to your house? So they can smoke? Okay. And you telling me that you don't do that?
I used to.
You used to, but you don't do that.
Sometimes, but it ain't.
But I'm trying to get the type of women that come to your house. And this is the type of women that come to your house are drug users. Outright drug users.
Pretty sure.
Okay.
Did you like him though? Did you like him when you met him?
Yes.
Okay. Well, you weren't mad at him when you met him. You kind of liked them all, right?
Yes.
Okay.
On the day Tonya disappeared, she had told friends that she was running an errand. She never returned. Later, her car would be found in Sowell's neighborhood. Much loved, her family knew things were wrong when she failed to return to pick up 2 paychecks.
When she initially went missing, her family went to police and they were asking for help to find her. And the police said, we know she has a drug problem. She'll come home when she's done using drugs. And this family really, they put up flyers. They were really searching for her, especially her daughter, Danita Carmichael, really cared for her mom deeply and was searching for her. And so this was really difficult for her.
15 months after claiming his first victim, Anthony Sowell killed 3 more times, and nobody suspects him of a thing, which means that the man who would become known as the Cleveland Strangler is still at large. The police even received more reports about him.
2 or 3 other women had made reports that mentioned him. There was one woman in particular, Gladys Wade, who in December 2008 said that Sowell approached her. She was walking past his house and tried to drag her in and attack her, and she fought him off. And when she reported her crime to the police, they found that she wasn't credible. And so after arresting him, they let him go.
Released to prey on people like Michelle Mason. Michelle was in a rare moment of happiness in her life. Thought to have kicked her heroin and crack cocaine habit, she was finally living independently. But on one October evening, she seems to have entered the home of Anthony Sowell without suspecting what was going on inside the mind of a serial killer. What happened to Michelle Mason? At 45, she had fallen victim to drugs like Sowell's other victims. It's likely that she got the Anthony Sowell strangulation treatment at 12205.
There was a number of women who actually made it out of Anthony Sowell's house, and each of them also described either being choked or strangled by him quite aggressively, sometimes with like a cord or a strap, other times with his hands.
He treated them very roughly, he raped them, and he abused them verbally and physically.
I got mad and I was like, cussed him out and told him to get the out of some hours.
So in your dream, you do remember getting mad?
I think so. Okay.
Do you ever remember doing anything with your hands? Actually doing stuff?
Yes, must because I remember that.
Can you tell me exactly what did you do with your hands?
I can. That's why I can tell you I wasn't no weapon.
Michelle's body would become one of those found at 12205 Imperial, victim number 5, and still no investigation into Sowell, a known sex attacker. Sowell remained unsuspected by the authorities. Some police would later say that working the neighborhood itself can prove difficult. They're not always welcome, and crack-addicted women truly do disappear for weeks on end and then return. But there was also Sowell's calm demeanor when he comes into contact with police, shown in the case of a woman who at one point in Sowell's story fell from a window at his home after being attacked, a story the entire neighborhood knew of.
12205 Imperial.
A passerby called in the incident. Indignant at the time it was taking to get help. As the neighbors of Sowell on Imperial Avenue watched, the passerby describes what he can see.
She look like she around about 40.
About 40? All right.
Yeah.
Is she conscious?
She can't get up, though.
But she is awake, right?
Look, I ain't even trying to go near her. I gave her my
Awake.
T-shirt to put on.
Is she awake?
She kind of awake and going in and out.
Breathing?
Yeah.
And which window did she fall out? The first or the second?
I don't know.
Was it less than 6 feet or more than 6 feet?
Second, yeah, 12, 15
All right.
feet.
All right. There we go. And it happened just now, correct?
Yeah.
The case where the woman fell out the window, Anthony Sowell actually went to the hospital with that woman, and as the police were trying to question her, she was kind of afraid to say anything because he was there. You know, he told the police, well, we were just using drugs together, and she accidentally fell out of the window. You know, she later said that he was, attacking her.
Hers was not the only story of getting trapped by a man, raped, and who would escape only to be ignored by authorities. Once out of the house, the women recounted horrific stories.
The pattern seems to be that he's initially very charming and able to connect with women and lure them back to his house. But once he gets them back there, he begins to lose control. He begins to lose his temper. He begins to want to assert his power over them, his abuse over them. And that's where we see time and time again. He rapes, he binds, he murders. He rapes, he binds, he murders.
Sowell again remains free to attack.
Essentially, people like Anthony Sowell and other serial rapists that have since been discovered, they were smarter than the police. They were smarter than the community. They knew that these women, and the women probably knew in some ways too, that nobody would care.
Ironically, he saw women as people who should be perfect. They were not supposed to have flaws.
He hated the fact that they used drugs and would even say things to them about it, and no, he wanted to help them, but then he would also do it himself. So he definitely had this strange relationship where he would meet women who had drug problems. He would kind of entice them into his home, with the idea of drinking or using drugs, but then he would also try to be very caring. Well, let me get you some clothes. Let me feed you. You look like you need to eat.
Someone was telling me that, and it stands to reason. He said that when he has these dreams, he meets these girls. Some of the girls remind him of his girlfriend. And I asked you, was anything that they said or was anything that they did? And you said by the way their past, you said you asked them about why you out here on the street. I talked to them. Yeah, you talked to them. Yeah. Why you out here on the street and
you're a nice girl. Why don't you get you some help?
Someone you're trying to help them. That's cool.
And then you said you get mad and they remind you of your girlfriend.
I know.
And then that's what happened.
So it's kind of these two personalities that people would describe seeing. He had at least one or two girlfriends at the time that we were able to hear from afterwards who talked about, the long conversations they would have and how, kind and introspective he could be. But then he could also be very violent if someone disagreed with him or didn't say the right things.
Meanwhile, the signs that a multiple murderer was at large were there for anyone to see or smell if they really investigated.
There are a number of reports of a bad smell being reported in the area.
Right next to the house where Anthony Sowell lived on Imperial Avenue was a place called Ray's Sausage. And for years, when there had been foul odors that the neighbors noticed, they would call the city or call the health department. When people would come out, they would always attribute the smells to Ray's Sausage. And in fact, the people that owned this very small family-owned sausage company redid their entire sewer system thinking that somehow the smell was being attributed to them, their sausage making, their dumpsters. We only realized later that it was probably Anthony Sowell. And in fact, the owner said at one point that they believed that he may have dumped some bodies in their dumpsters.
This fast food store became the focus of complaints. Surely the smell was coming from there. The owners took the issue seriously, spent tens of thousands of dollars digging up drains.
What we now know is that was the smell that was emanating from the decaying corpses that were in his home and buried in his garden.
But with 5 women dead and all having been seen last in Sowell's neighbourhood, that fact was still far from emerging. On January 17, 2009, Sowell was to strike again. As a child, Kim Wise Smith was close to her father, no trouble to her parents. When a teenager, Kim had begun sampling drugs, and when a young woman, she was hooked. After she disappears, her father offers a reward to help find her, but she was never to be seen alive again. Murdered by Sowell, her body buried in the garden. It took a DNA test from her father to confirm it was her. It was next the turn of Nancy Cobbs to become the focus of Anthony Sowell's gaze. Nancy Cobbs was, on her own admission, a very poor mother. But as she got older, so she got her life back in some sort of order, helping raise her grandchildren, but often being seen with a man drinking beer on a stoop. That man was Sowell, and in April 2009, she disappeared. Friends and family combed the neighbourhood. They did not search the garden of 12205 Imperial. Amelda Hunter, known as Amy, by 14 she had become pregnant. Her daughter born deaf and with cerebral palsy. Amy found solace in drugs and by 2009 often sought both them and companionship in 12205 Imperial. She'd struck up a friendship with an assassin. How would Amy's story end? Inside the home of Anthony Sowell, Amy Hunter would have seen the clothes left abandoned after Sowell had claimed the lives of his victims. She may even have seen the remains of others left to decompose in rooms and inside barely concealed spaces. Certainly, she would have been overwhelmed by the stench of putrefying flesh. But, likely as not, heavily under the influence of drugs, she was powerless to either escape or avoid the same fate of the women whose bodies were all around her. She became victim number 9 of the Cleveland Strangler. Still no outcry in the neighbourhood as so many women went missing, and still no suspicion about Sowell, who'd actually become a popular fixture on Imperial Avenue.
He really had this kind of outward appearance to the neighborhood where he would hold barbecues and chat with people. They didn't really suspect him of doing anything like this.
Janice Webb liked a party, the joker according to her family. The same profile as the others, addicted to crack cocaine, often seen wandering the streets looking for a way of satisfying her lethal habit, falling under the spell of a man who by now was running out of space to store the bodies.
All I say is under 10, that's all I. So, hold up, let me see.
If you were in my shoes, what would you want me to tell you? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6.
I don't know.
He was literally leaving them at his feet. Some believe by this stage he had lost his mind.
The fact that he murdered 2 women and just left their bodies on the floor of his home with no attempt to conceal them really does suggest that there was some kind of underlying mental illness, potentially compounded by his drink and drug problems.
There's not just a sense that he's killing and neatly, tying everything up and moving along and trying not to do this again. There's a sense that this is who he is. This is his life. He's surrounded by his handiwork everywhere he turns.
Talicia Forston was just 31 and a mother of 3 by the time she had been captured by crack. Sowell's 10th victim. Her remains later found, buried in the garden. 8 weeks later, in September 2009, Diane Turner was to become victim number 11. Her fragmented family life meant not only that nobody reported her missing, even after her body was recovered from 12205, it would remain unclaimed, unrecognised in the city morgue for nearly a year.
You got 4 bodies up top. You got 1 body in the basement. There's no more room in the house for bodies. So you gotta go outside. This would make her most likely the last one.
Actually, sheriff's deputies visited his house and he had to check in regularly as a sex offender. And I think the same week as these bodies were discovered, they had checked in on him at his home, and they had just never entered his home because that wasn't part of what they did. If they did, they probably would have noticed something amiss or smelled the foul odor that neighbors had been complaining about for years, but couldn't really pinpoint, where it was coming from.
The series of killings finally ended towards the end of October 2009. It was not because of any great detective work. Rather, it was because Sowell did not complete his usual routine of attack, rape and murder. A woman called Latundra Billups joined up with Sowell for them to jointly buy crack before returning to 12205. An officer finally investigates and discovers other allegations of rape against Sowell, and police on October 29th finally entered 12205 Imperial Avenue.
When police went back to Anthony Sowell's house to arrest him for the rape, they initially just kind of walked into the house, and when they went upstairs, they found the two bodies that were decomposing pretty much out in the open, or maybe just only slightly covered over. So then they decided they needed to go over the whole house from top to bottom. They cordoned off the house, the backyard, and when they started digging in the backyard, I think they actually used some special sensors and found that there were some bodies buried underneath there. So they unearthed a number of the bodies from the backyard.
Officers interviewing Sowell try to win his confidence, engage in small talk, at first about his grandchildren.
You have 4?
You got 4, man.
Yeah. Shit. They call you Papa or Grandpa? Yeah?
And
you love that, don't you?
No.
You do.
It's okay, no. But that's everybody call me that.
Yeah, that's the love for them. So I know that. You probably be skinning and grinning.
Yeah, yes he do.
Don't you? You don't be grinning when they be coming up to you?
Anthony Sowell had entered the macabre pantheon of serial killers known throughout the world. Under police interrogation, despite protesting that the voices in his head had something to do with the murders, he eventually gave in to the truth.
So this boy, born on a street in this unassuming green house with cousins and a mother and a grandmother, grows up to be the notorious Cleveland Strangler, known for his viciousness in attacking women.
He's killed at least 11 women, and the motive behind that would appear to be one of sexual gratification, but potentially also one of power and control, particularly when you look at the method that he most likely used to kill those women, which is strangulation.
And for the city of Cleveland, Sowell's crimes meant a period of reflection.
It was a sobering moment for Cleveland to realize that 11 citizens could go missing and nobody could make the connection that they were all in the same place, had all been killed by the same man.
For a while, 12205 was left standing, a reminder of Sowell's crimes, where artifacts of the women had been abandoned, clothing and jewelry and other things in the upstairs apartment of his home.
No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! Say it! No justice! No peace! No justice!
People moved quickly to get control of the house so that they could knock it down. And, within the year, the house was bulldozed and made into an empty lot. And there's been plans in the works for almost 5 years now to put some kind of memorial at that site. I think it left the whole community numb. How could we let this happen? How could we let this happen?
Sowell was given the death penalty in 2011, a sentence not yet carried out.
He's on death row in Ohio at a maximum security prison. He actually has a number of appeals in his case. He's definitely appealing the sentence that could put him to death. The arguments basically are, that the mitigating factors weren't really given to the jury enough. They didn't know enough about the reasons that he committed the crime.
Anthony Sowell would claim he never had a chance. He says he witnessed women in authority, his mother and grandmother, physically abusing his female cousins, watched and then took part in rape as 11 years old. His perspective on women skewed, he would argue that he was destined to become a rapist and a killer. An Ohio jury and judge did not accept that as mitigation. His steady military record and, ironically, his time in prison proved that he knew how to behave. His house of horrors was evidence of a mind twisted, but Sowell was sane enough to know that he had denied a future to the most vulnerable women of the neighborhood. 12205 Imperial is no longer there, but it has given up its secrets, so the knowledge of what Sowell did will haunt Cleveland forever. A forest can be forbidding, a place of secrets, of danger, a place to hide. The Ardennes on the French-Belgian border offers perfect territory for a husband and wife team intent on murder. First, they prowl towns nearby, then they disappear into the dark forest with their victims. One day, pregnant, the woman, Monique Olivier, sees a young girl, beckons her over.
She asks for this girl's help. She says, "I'm pregnant and I'm not feeling well. Can you help me? Can you come with me?"
A year later, the scene is repeated in another town. Monique Olivier's baby is now born, but that has not curbed the need to kill. The husband and wife team are back on the prowl. Another girl comes into view of Olivier and her husband, the killer, Michel Fernay.
She'd have thought nothing of approaching the car. There was a man, a woman, and a little child, so why would she be frightened?
None of the victims would have thought that they were being lured into a trap.
But the man in this picture is quite simply a monster, like few others. A child killer.
Will anyone notice? Will the little girl realize the danger she is in and run? Or is she about to become the latest to suffer at the hands of Michel Fernay and Monique Olivier? Before the so-called French Diabolical Alliance kill again, can anyone get inside the mind of a serial killer? Isabelle Laville is just 17 as she returns from college. A car pulls up and a woman asks for directions to a fuel station.
We have to speculate precisely what happens that day, but there's enough to suggest that Isabelle is not suspicious. There is a man and a woman in the car, a couple who need her help.
Monique is actually central to Michel's ambitions. Very few women are going to get into a car of a strange man that they see.
She's very out of her comfort zone. Up until now, people have only ever been kind to her and wanted to help. Her parents, teachers, school friends.
Within seconds, she has been bundled into the back of the vehicle owned by Monique Olivier and Michel Fernay. On being reported missing, police suspect she's been abducted by a French serial killer later identified as Émile Louis. They have his description, warning people to look out for him. He was operating in the same region where Isabelle has gone missing. But police are wrong. Émile Louis has not abducted Isabelle.
The French police were incredibly unlucky that they had another series of abductions and murders happening in the same region of France at the same time. That's unprecedented.
Isabelle will never be seen alive again. 19 years will pass before her body is found at the bottom of a well in a tiny French village near Auxerre. Isabelle had become the first victim of the ogre of the Ardennes, Michel Fernay, and his wife. Fernay's crimes are amongst the worst France has ever suffered.
He's killed at least 8 young girls and women, but it's likely to be more.
Their crimes are beyond belief. It left the country wondering how it could have produced such monsters.
When Olivier has seduced the girls into trusting her, Fernay attacks. He rapes, then kills. Some victims as young as 12 and 13, lured into a trap by the couple who exploit the innocence and goodwill of children.
I think Michel Fernay and Monique Olivier played on the fact that children want to help. They want to be seen to be helping people, and young people want to be seen to be public-spirited.
We're socialized into trusting women more. We're socialized into believing what they say a lot more. So the fact that Monique is there and offering assistance or asking for help is key to Michel being able to enact the brutal rapes and murders that he does.
Fernay and Olivier will carry out a series of murders over an 18-year period, using at times their own baby boy to put their victims at ease. They're a husband and wife murder team who left an entire nation in shock. Fernay's perverted sexual behavior begins in the 60s.
Michel Fernay first comes to the attention of the police when he's about 24.
He's arrested for indecently assaulting a little girl. He's interviewed by a psychiatrist who concludes that he can be treated to prevent him offending again.
That psychiatrist couldn't have been more wrong.
Released after 6 years inside, a tawdry 20 years follow as Fernay commits sex crime after sex crime. He's charged and convicted 13 times.
He is every woman's worst nightmare.
And he is a man who coldly calculates that he will need a woman by his side to commit the crimes that he's planning.
Michel Fernay hatched upon their MO as a way of preventing being caught, because you've got to remember he was previously caught for offences when he acted on his own. So what we know about criminals, and particularly sex offenders, is they introduce learnt behaviour into the way in which they offend. And when you're caught in a particular way, often you try to prevent that happening again.
It is during and immediately after one of his extended stays in prison that the key cast of Fernay's degenerate life story begins to assemble. It is a tale of a secret stash of buried gold, a gathering of unlikely partners in crime, a bitter wife who wants her first husband dead, and of the unwitting innocents that she would lure to their deaths. Fernay's icebreaker, his means of creating the diabolical alliance with the gangster's mole that is Monique Olivier, is an advertisement.
He puts an ad in a newspaper saying, listen, I'm a prisoner, I'm lonely, I'm reaching out to any woman that wants a relationship with me. And lo and behold, he meets Monique Olivier.
Its words, when translated, read, a prisoner would like to exchange letters with a woman of any age so he can overcome loneliness. Monique seems drawn to men in jail. Her first husband was in prison, and now the man who would be her next husband.
For some women, it's a sense of low self-esteem. They feel that that's all they deserve. For others, it's a sense of danger.
I think there are particular types of people, in some cases women, that are attracted to men that are in prison. They're attracted to the danger that they represent and the risk that they represent.
Needless to say, the fact that this woman was so enticed by someone like this shows that there was things going on in her personality, in her emotional state, that were very lacking.
The relationship which follows is obsessive. Whilst Fernay is in prison, the couple exchange intense letters.
These were passionate letters. She was infatuated.
So when the letters between them are found and analysed, they actually display a lot of passion, a lot of sexual passion, a lot of emotional connection.
She had been married twice before. In one relationship, she was physically abused, and in a letter from Fernay, he makes Monique a promise about Mark, the abusive husband. I will make them atone for their crimes, he says. I also know that I will kill Mark. And he tells Olivier what he wants in return.
Monique is married to one of the men her husband knows from prison, and she hates him. So she enters into a pact with Fernay. You kill my husband, and I'll owe you.
In return, Michel asks that Monique will help him find young women to abuse.
The couple agree to marry. The precise deal struck, in sickening detail, involves Monique helping entice virgins into Fernay's grasp. Shortly after his release, they get together.
So he moves in with Monique, they marry, and they move to the Auxerre area of France. At this stage, Monique is still expecting Fernay to fulfill his promise to kill her first husband. But Fernay has other plans.
Those plans include abduction, rape, and murder. Shortly after arriving in the Auxerre region, the couple carry out the first murder of Isabelle Laville. Evidence would later emerge that when having sex, Monique would play the role of the little girl that she'd seen killed. She would act out what they had done.
They're both getting a sexual high off of this, off of the violence and the murder that they're enacting, and actually they're role-playing it later on in the privacy of their own bedroom.
This sort of couples in it together is not as uncommon as we would like to think. Bonnie and Clyde, Myra Hindley and Anne Brady, Fred and Rosemary West.
There's a sense of us against them, and this is very much is what's happening. Add into the mix the sexual element, the sexual high that they're getting, and the two of them are very much in a world of their own.
They seem to have all provided each other with some sort of evil reinforcement. Kept apart, they might never have killed.
The couple's next murder will come after an almost unbelievable yet true story of a hunt for buried treasure. When in prison, Fernay had befriended a fellow prisoner, Jean-Pierre Elgouache. His wife is called Farida. She soon joins the cast of Fernay's ugly story.
He had heard from Jean-Pierre that a fortune in gold coins had been stashed in a forest north of Paris. It was the proceeds of bank robberies. And he wondered if Farida knew where the stash might be.
Amongst her underworld friends is one of the bank robbers involved in burying the gold. Fernay and Monique Olivier scheme their way into Farida's life.
An alliance was formed between the three, Fernay and the two women. They would share the proceeds.
Fernay sees this as a turning point because somewhere out there is buried treasure, life-changing money.
Farida is no more than a stooge, needed to help solve the mystery of the location of the gold, but for nothing more. She could have no idea that her life was in danger if the trio actually did track down the bullion.
They are partners in crime at this point. They have a shared cause to find this gold.
She can help him get rich quick. Farida is a means to an end.
He is utterly devoid of emotion in his crimes. One psychiatric examination concludes using that exact word. He is devoid, it says, of human feelings. Farida isn't an equal partner.
She and Fernay spend days searching an area of the national park north of Paris. Will they find it? And what will Farida's fate be if they do? In the late 80s, the timeline of terror that Michel Fernay and his wife Monique Olivier will unleash upon northern France and Belgium is in its infancy. They had killed once, but their minds were now on getting rich, quick. Together with Farida, they search near a graveyard in a wood near Paris.
Incredibly, Farida and Fernay find the treasure.
She actually leads them to the gold.
What are the chances? But the moment the young woman and Fernay find the gold coins, Fernay's life does indeed change as he hoped it would.
But what's clear is that Michel Fernay was intent from the beginning on keeping that for himself.
The gold discovered, the Diabolical Alliance have another victim in their sights. The recovered cache of ingots is hard to sell. 2 years pass before Fernay and Farida find a buyer in Brussels. It's believed they raise 1.2 million francs, the equivalent of nearly £1 million today. Fernay and Monique journey north and buy a castle, Château Sautou, near Charleville-Mézières, in the Ardennes region bordering Belgium.
If you were to pick a home which is also a hideout, somewhere where screams can't be heard, where you could come, you could go, you wouldn't be spotted, where you might even bury bodies, well, this was the place.
The couple are regularly in contact with Farida. They still have her share of the proceeds. A meeting is arranged, and the three drive into the Ardennes forest.
Up until the point where she's in the car, everything he said he's going to do, he has, as has his wife, which is probably giving her a sense of security. False sense of security, of course.
What happens next is disputed, but what investigators believe took place has been partially corroborated by the other woman in the car, Monique Olivier.
Monique blurted out in a courtroom one day that her husband had sat in the back seat of the car and he'd wrapped a shoelace around Farida's neck.
As he did so, a knife fell from his pocket.
Monique picks it up, hands it to Michel, and he proceeds to kill Farida.
Her body is abandoned by the couple and is still undiscovered, discarded somewhere in the desolate French forest of the Ardennes. Jean-Pierre Elgouache would eventually confront Fernay about both the disappearance of the gold coins and his wife, but Fernay escapes. Elgouache is soon back in prison for an unrelated offence, and Fernay is back on the prowl, having blended into society.
Criminals like Fernay don't carry a sign around their necks saying, "I am a sex attacker" or rapist.
The problem for police and for those who actually knew him is that he appeared normal.
He holds down a job as a handyman and electrician. He's quietly spoken. He's also giving nothing away. He has no friendships outside his marriage.
What made Fernay into the man he became? Michel Fernay claims to be tortured by a fact of his early life: abuse at the hands of his mother.
She sexually abused him, and he holds this up very quickly when he's confronted with the fact that he's a sexual abuser.
But is he telling the truth? Abuse by a mother is not unknown, but it's very rare.
What we do know about sex offenders is some often claim to have been sexually abused when they haven't, and statistically we know that it's not always the case that people that have been sexually abused as children go on to sexually abuse children as adults. So we should be quite sceptical about his claim that he was sexually abused by his mother.
When a child, Fernay lives with a sister in modest surroundings, complaining that he could hear her using a bucket for a toilet and saying this was unbecoming for a woman. It is degrading, he says, and not living up to the image that he has of the perfect woman.
He becomes obsessed with the concept of woman as virgin, pure like the Holy Mary.
The misogyny that he holds for women is couched in this idea that no one can live up to the Virgin Mary, that there's this virgin ideal that no woman can aspire to.
He told investigators that his only regret in life was never having married a virgin.
And he actually mentions the fact that he used to watch his sister soil in a bucket, as he calls it, basically in effect go to the bathroom in a bucket, and this revolted him, and this revolted him not just for the act, but the fact that a woman shouldn't do that. Somehow a woman should be beyond anything physical, almost anything human. And so begins his obsession with this idea of virginity and perfection in women.
No female is safe in the company of this man. He's obsessed with woman as sex object. And there's no respect at all with Fernay, none. Just this sort of sense of entitlement that a female is his to use and abuse.
And those females that he most wants to abuse are the ones that Fernay considers most pure.
The profile of his next victim will be the same as his first, a young woman, someone who Fernay may consider is a virgin.
By now, Monique Olivier will do anything for Fernay. He has still to keep his promise and murder her former husband. She does not object. He seems to completely control her life.
Well, there are very good examples of Michel Fernay controlling the way Monique Olivier conducted herself when she was in his company. For example, there's a good example of them going to dinner parties and him not allowing her to speak unless he gave her the permission to.
But there is another reason that she appears willing to be consumed by Fernay's murderous ambitions. She wants a father for her child. Now pregnant by Fernay, she helps him abduct a young student called Fabien Leroy.
The couple see a girl in a supermarket.
Monique, heavily pregnant, asks for help. Wonders if she could accompany her to a hospital. Points to her car.
A pregnancy is just another prop to be used to play the game that they've been playing, this awful, horrible, monstrous game.
Monique Olivier was able to entice and lure the young women into the car. She was the pacifier, but she was also the hook, the element that gave the woman a sense of trust.
Watching in the car at the supermarket, crouched behind the front seat, Michel Fernay.
When she's in the car, we know that Fernay will have subdued her quickly, either by tying a lace or rope around her neck, or by striking her hard enough for her to become instantly disoriented.
Fabien is caught completely off guard.
She's raped, then Fernay shoots her dead. Her body is buried in nearby woods. Yet more evidence of a man who takes his satisfaction and then throws away a person as if she is no more than a discarded wrapping paper.
And throughout the incident, Monique Olivier watching and actually facilitating the girl's rape and murder.
Nobody hears a thing. Her disappearance from the supermarket car park goes unnoticed. No screams of protest, no signs of distress.
All of them went willingly, thinking they were helping people, thinking that they were being public spirited. So I think it would have been a tremendous shock to them realise that they'd been duped into getting into the car and that they were in a very risky situation.
Months pass. The baby is born. Fernay and Olivier appear a perfect couple starting a family. But Fernay's appetite for abduction and rape show no signs of being satisfied. On a train between Paris and Charleville-Mézières, he sits a few feet from a young woman called Jean-Marie Desremaux. They chat. He tells her of his new family. Waiting for him at the station, Monique. Jean-Marie is not aware of any danger. As she travels on the train, glancing out of the window, she could not imagine the man that she was speaking with was a serial killer. Her journey is mundane. The man, no threat. Police have not been warning young women. There's no reason to. Nobody is searching for a male-female abduction team.
When you have a man and a woman that are involved in abductions, then that is a very difficult thing to investigate because people don't see things that look normal. They don't see things that look like every day. And so they had a perfect cover.
Fernay at this time is beyond suspicion. Detective work in the 80s is antiquated compared with today.
And it was a completely different time in terms of technology, in terms of politics, policing. So where the couple actually lived and their profile made their job much easier.
There was no internet, no instant messaging. Security cameras were very few. Policing was harder.
Fernay continues to chat on the train with Jean-Marie. Talks of offering the young lady a lift home. Suggests that they will need a babysitter. Perhaps she would like to earn a little cash.
Fernay's met at the station by Monique. Well, what could appear more natural?
The young woman would have been completely unaware of the danger she is in.
So he's doing what many serial killers do. He's portraying a normal life while concurrently having this double life that's very dark.
Mums and dads don't attack girls. They care for them. They help them. That's her experience.
He's married, he has a child, he seems like your normal run-of-the-mill neighbor that you'd see. There's nothing that stands out about him.
What will happen to Jean-Marie Desremeaux as she walks towards the vehicle with Fernay and Olivier? Can she possibly imagine what is going on inside the mind of a serial killer? Jean-Marie Desremeaux, a student, tells Fernay and Olivier that she's expected by friends and asks for a meeting the following day. The couple agree. She can then come with them to see their home and meet the baby, spend some time getting used to him. The happy scene ends at the car park adjacent to the railway station. Before Jean-Marie leaves, it is Monique who makes one final suggestion.
And it's Monique that says, hey, would you like a lift home? Don't worry about it, we can take you.
Jean-Marie says no, but as she has promised, she returns the following day. She doesn't intend to stay long with the couple.
Having a couple offer you support, offer you help, ask for assistance, it feels more natural.
As she's driven along the long road approaching the chateau near Sedan in northern France, Jean-Marie is about to discover that the couple are far from what they seem. Fernay suddenly stuns Jean-Marie with an amazing question. He wonders if she's a virgin. He will admit to the conversation when later questioned. The young woman, stunned, says she has a boyfriend and would now like to leave. Fernay will not allow that.
The modus operandi of this couple suggests that Fernay will quickly subdue his victim. He'll render her powerless.
He probably hits her as hard as he can and as quickly as he can. Then his pattern was to gag those that he attacked.
With Olivier watching, their new baby in his crib, Fernay rapes the young woman before strangling her. They load her body into a freezer. Days later, they bury her in the grounds of the chateau. Student friends heard nothing from Jean-Marie for days. It's not like her, and they report her missing. Police launch a search. They begin to suspect that she may have become the latest victim of Émile Louis, the other serial killer on the loose in France at that time. He's usually struck, though, further south. Has he migrated north?
They were working as a couple later on with a child, and that didn't fit the stereotype of what the police would be looking for.
In the confusion created by the fact that France had different serial killers snatching girls and women from the streets, Fernay and Olivier are free to attack again. And to further make it tough for French detectives, the couple leave the country. They move to Belgium, where, incredibly, another serial killer is soon on the loose. Marc Dutroux would later be convicted of killing 6 young girls in the same area that Fernay and Olivier have moved to. The couple, now often travelling between the two countries, continue to look out for young women, possible virgins, who they can entice into their lives, use, abuse, and then discard.
I think that they shared experiences, those experiences of abducting and killing those women, that they both found sexually exciting and were both aroused by. And I think that, in its perverse way, cemented the bond between them.
In a town called Namur in Belgium, they spot a 12-year-old girl. Her name is Elisabeth Brichet. Fernay and Olivier wait for 3 hours as she plays at a friend's house.
The evidence suggests that Fernay and Olivier had planned this crime to the last detail.
For the couple, Elizabeth presents a new opportunity, and she's only 12.
Michel Fernay and Monique Olivier were a couple acting in unison. They used their own child to present as an everyday couple and to make them above suspicion.
You can imagine little Elizabeth. Here's this poor little baby boy crying his eyes out, and the parents are from out of town.
The level of depravity that these two have in terms of how they try and entice girls is unbelievable. By this point, Monique's had a baby, a little 3-month-old baby, and she uses the baby to give young girls a sense of security to come with her. And this little girl, of course, feels safe. This is a woman with a baby who needs my help. Not only does she feel safe, she probably thinks she's doing the right thing. She's probably been raised to think this is the right thing to do.
Within moments of her coming across Olivier and Fernay, she would have been asked into their vehicle.
As she sat in that car, Elizabeth would have had no sense of fear. I mean, why would she? This was her home. She was with a nice man, his wife, and their little baby. What was there to worry about?
The fate of Elizabeth Brichet was in the hands of a mother and father like no other. One, a serial killer, and the other, a woman who makes his actions possible. What happened to little Elizabeth after she was snatched by France's Diabolical alliance, Fernay and Olivier, confirmed the couple as one of the worst husband and wife killing teams the world has ever known. As ever, Fernay insists that Olivier establish if his victim is a virgin, and then he strikes.
She was raped.
Not only was Monique not bothered by this, but perhaps was getting something from it as well.
In a slight change to their usual routine, Elizabeth is not immediately killed.
Did they offer her food or drink, or keep her bound and gagged? Did Monique console her? Did she have a chance of being spared?
Fernay's behaviour was remorseless. He showed no mercy.
All we know is that she was killed at the chateau.
We don't know how, and we don't know what the final thing was that made Fernay act.
Perhaps fear that Elizabeth would be able to identify him.
Elizabeth's family had to wait 15 years for her body to be found. Her fate had been decided the second that she agreed to help a pregnant woman with a crying child.
He's a cold-hearted serial killer, and she is a monster who helps him.
Throughout this period, they used the grounds of the chateau as a burial ground. Elizabeth's remains were eventually discovered there. Belgian police, working to an early 90s set of investigative and communication standards, did not link what had happened to Elizabeth with what had taken place in France. They were in the dark about the missing 12-year-old.
They had nothing to go on. No descriptions, no immediately obvious pattern, and no bodies had been discovered.
We can be confident that they were not looking for a husband and wife team who kept a small baby with them.
Elizabeth had been snatched just before Christmas. It would be another 11 months before Fernay and Olivier would strike again. They see a girl, Natasha, shopping with her mother. She separates for just a few moments, and Monique slows down in her van to ask for directions, feigns illness.
She asks for this girl's help. She says, "I'm not feeling well. Can you help me? Can you come with me?"
As Natasha shows concern, Fernay snatches her and throws her in the back of the van. She is raped, strangled, and her body abandoned on a beach near Nantes. It is found 3 days later. This time, police believe they have their man, but they're wrong.
This case was complicated by the mistaken arrest of a neighbour, a man who was completely innocent of this crime, but who had linked up with a terrorist group.
He is innocent, but does his next action inadvertently cost the lives of more teenage girls?
He ended up killing himself in prison, so perhaps police thought he was the man.
If that was the view, it would explain why no wide-scale campaign was in action warning women of a serial killer on the loose. It is 1990, and the couple seem to have finished their series of murders. No other disappearances are reported in the Ardennes region until the year 2000. Out of the blue, Fernay says he wants to go hunting for a virgin. Céline Saison, 18 and going home from school, is asked for help by Fernay. He says he's lost, asks the girl to accompany him. Trusting him, she climbs into the vehicle. Fernay immediately locks the doors, tells her that she should now allow him to have sex with him, or he'll throw acid in her face. she has no choice but to submit.
Of course, this child, like so many before her, is bound and raped and killed.
He pushes her to the floor of the van and strangles her using a rope. Later, he will return to the home that the couple are renting in Belgium.
Again, he crosses the border with Monique, disorienting police, and aided by how easy it is to travel between the two countries.
When he gets back, he empties the contents of Celine's school bag on the family kitchen table, telling Monique, "I went hunting. I got satisfaction." As their son sleeps, the couple pick through Celine's holiday snaps from America. It was a trophy being paraded for his wife, a prosecuting lawyer would say in court.
Michel Fernay is a man that has very little empathy, very little remorse. He lives his life the way he wants to live his life, and that's quite evident in the way he committed his offences, the fact that he took very little care in disposing of the bodies and left the bodies on property belonging to himself. That tells you an awful lot about his mindset. He was a man that was completely driven by his own needs and doing whatever he felt he could and wanted to do.
Fernay's final victim would be a 13-year-old Asian French girl called Mananya Thumpong that he had stalked in his old hometown of Sedan. He persuades her to come with him in his vehicle and drives deep into the forest, where he rapes and kills her, burying her body nearby. Again, he returns home to Monique, trumpeting his satisfaction at finding another virgin. In 2003, the couple make the mistake which would finally bring an end to the series of murders. In a town called Fernay on the Franco-Belgian border, Fernay rather than Monique approaches a 13-year-old girl called Marie.
He personally approaches her, and now this is unusual. He asks her for directions, and then he actually offers her a lift. When she says no, he tells her off for not being trusting enough. Mary tries to run, but he grabs her and throws her in the back of the van.
They grab this little girl, as they usually do, they bind her like they've always done, put her in the back of a van and start driving off.
This little girl pounds her feet against the back door until it releases and opens.
And eventually breaks open. She falls out of the van onto a road. Thank goodness another motorist sees her.
Fernay and his wife double back,
presumably to try and pick her up again.
But the Diabolical Alliance lose their nerve when their prey is something more than a defenseless young girl.
The young girl with the motorist are able to get the license plate, and eventually the two are caught.
That little girl so narrowly avoided being his latest victim.
She also kick-started the chain of events which lead to the arrest of the Diabolical Alliance.
The escape of his latest victim marked the beginning of the end. The Belgian police were given rapid assistance from the French about Fernay's past, but it was far from over.
Fernay gives nothing away. It is Monique, mindful of a recent case of a Belgian serial killer, Marc Dutroux, who cracks first. He had killed 6 times, and his wife was prosecuted as an accomplice and given a 30-year jail sentence. Monique became fearful that that would be her fate too.
By the time they're caught, it's very interesting because self-preservation kicks in for both of them. So Monique realizes that very recently another serial killer has been caught and his wife has been given life in prison because she knew about it. So she thinks this is going to be the case with me. So I need to tell them, do you know what? It just wasn't just this one case of abduction. There's been a bunch more. So she gives him up right from the start.
As soon as he's locked up, as soon as he's arrested and charged, she feels that she's in a position to then speak. And I think, in all honesty, she realised that the game was up.
Eventually, Fernay confesses to the murder of 8 girls and young women. The evidence was undoubtedly there to suggest he was their killer, but there are probably more victims to his name.
What of Monique? What does she claim? That she was a victim too. She'd only been following his orders.
I think it's very easy to suggest that Monique Olivier was acting under duress, but I think the facts suggest otherwise. And I think it's quite clear that she played an active part in the abductions and the subsequent murders of the victims, and that she has a deviant sexual interest in children in her own right.
She had so many chances to come clean with what happened, and she was such an integral part to what he was doing that I sincerely doubt that the disparity of power was to the extent that she's saying.
The court did not believe her claims. Meanwhile, Fernay tried all in his power to remain in control.
His behaviour in court was telling. He refuses to go at first, and then when he's forced to, he shows absolutely no interest.
He had to be forced into the dock to listen to the evidence of abuse, rape, and murder. All the time, sitting with his arms folded defiantly, ignoring proceedings, arrogant.
Police are as certain as they can be that Fernay has killed other young women. Monique Olivier even accused him of murdering the family au pair.
Sex offenders tend to be quite prolific in the way in which they offend. And traditionally when they're caught, they only tell you a small percentage of what they've done. So I think it's highly likely that there are other offences, other more serious offences, and potentially other murders that Michel Fernay and Monique Olivier are responsible for.
But Fernay won't give up any information, unless he feels he has no option.
It's quite clear that even after being arrested and spoken to by the police, Michel Fernay wanted to maintain some control and really has only ever spoken about the offences which he clearly knows the police know about. And I think it's highly unlikely that he will speak about other crimes unless the police present him with some strong evidence.
For him it was a joke, and he still won't reveal the whereabouts of some of the bodies of who else he's killed.
He's toying with them, and he's getting that last sense of not just control, but I think being able to inflict pain on people by doing this.
Certainly psychologists are convinced that his arrest meant that lives were saved. More murders would have followed.
He actually admitted that he'd probably have killed again if he hadn't been arrested. Now, this is a serial killer who was caught before he could kill even more women. He'd be killing now if he was free.
In 2004, Michel Fernay was sentenced to life in prison. Monique was given a life sentence with a minimum of 28 years before being considered for parole. The couple had snatched young girls over an 18-year period, using the opportunity of driving between jurisdictions and believing they would never be captured.
Sometimes you come across a case that's just so shocking that it makes you question whether it can possibly be true. And the case of this couple falls directly into that category.
The fact that he's sentenced to life imprisonment and will never be released should be a relief for everybody in France, but ultimately it should be a sign that everyone gets caught in the end. It's just a matter of time.